Thank you for inviting me to speak here. Thank you, Dr. Fehrer. And thank you for introducing India so nicely, Mr. Bade. After the introduction that she has given, I don't know what else to say. But thank you. That is much more than what I have actually done. So I've done a lot less than what you have said. Liver transplantation is still my passion, but I enjoy the other fields. I enjoy management. I enjoy thinking through strategy. And that is what we are trying to do with the Austrian Anadi Bank. So thank you, everyone. I don't want to take too much time. I know there's dinner at the end of this. The weather has been very bad. We drove down from Vienna to Graz. And I used to think English weather is bad. And Vienna's weather is superb. And you won't believe it. It started raining like the Indian monsoons, very heavy rain on the highway. And there were big hailstones. So I've never seen something like this. So I think maybe I brought a bit of Indian weather and also a bit of English weather to Austria. How do I? So people often ask me this question, is India relevant? A country with 1.2 billion population on the globe is relevant, I think. However, India has 70% of its people in rural areas. It has a country, it is a country with 65% below the age of 65, where the rest of the world, the population is aging very fast. Even in China, there's an aging population, a huge aging population. In India, there's a young population. The literacy rate has gone up to 80%, and there's a working democracy. Yes, it has problems, but there's a working democracy. So I think India is relevant. And as Mr. Bade pointed out, there's a lot of macroeconomic stability in India. As the foreign exchange reserves in the country is at an all-time high at more than $350 billion. There's a steady inflow of foreign direct investment, which is up to February 15 was 41.2 billion. The latest figures show a GDP growth of 7.4%. And there's a current account deficit, which is estimated to be 0.9% of the GDP this year. In terms of power, India is the 6th largest energy consumer on the globe. It has an installed capacity of 259 gigawatts and 265,000 kilometers of transmission lines. There are a lot of new power projects which are being set up, and in the next few years, 4,000 megawatt power projects have been signed up, and $15 billion worth of transmission projects are to be bid out in the next couple of years. Even for renewable energy, which is very big in Austria, I believe. Austria is one of the leading places for renewable energy. The target for renewable energy, thank you, is set at 175,000 megawatts. And as Mr. Bade pointed out, 100% foreign direct investment is now being allowed in infrastructure. Where telecom is concerned, telecom is also one of the fastest growing markets in India. The telecom subscription is going to touch 1 billion now in India, with a projected growth of 40%. And the number of telecom towers in India is expected to reach almost 1 million this year. Roads. India has the second largest road network with 4.8 million kilometers, and it carries 85% of the passenger traffic, and 60% of freight traffic is carried by roads. So there's a target rate of road construction by the government, which has been now set is 30 kilometers per day. Again, 100% foreign direct investment is allowed in the roads now. Railways. It has the third largest rail network, covering 114,500 kilometers, carrying 21 million passengers and 2.8 million tons of freight traffic. Again, $140 billion of investments is required to modernize our rail network over the next 5 years. Ports. 13 major and 200 non-major ports are being planned. This total cargo traffic, which is handled by our ports, now stand at 1.2 billion tons. And the freight handling capacity has to be increased to 2.4 billion tons to maintain the growth of the economy. Airports, there are 126 airports planned. There are 126 airports currently, which are carrying 169 million passengers and 2.3 million tons of freight. There are many public-private partnership projects which has been now planned in the 4 major cities. 15 greenfield airports have been approved, and again, 100% FDI, foreign direct investment, has been allowed for the existing airports. Healthcare. Indian healthcare market size is estimated at $65 billion. It is supposed to grow to $100 billion by the end of this year. So you can just see the growth is extremely fast in India for every infrastructure-related activity. India requires almost 600 to 700,000 beds over the next 5 to 6 years. And a lot of government initiatives have been taken in healthcare. 100% foreign direct investment is allowed. There's tax holidays and lower tariffs, which is now being given to hospitals. The demand for healthcare services in India is continuing to rise, and private sector players are very well positioned to leverage this opportunity, given the very low contribution of government spending. So, is India relevant? I say India is relevant. You can just see what the massive infrastructure needs is. But what are the challenges? The challenges today for India is that bureaucrats are controlling our country. So decision making is delayed. There's very inefficient infrastructure still. They are highly educated and literate people, but skills are limited, as I was mentioning to you earlier. In spite of this, our family has been engaged in multiple business activities. We have been in business for the last 200 years. I was the only person in maybe the last 20, 30 generations to venture out into a different field and do medicine. I was encouraged to do what I wanted to, if I could correct. So our family is from the deserts of Rajasthan, where living standards and living conditions were very difficult. So people learned to work hard, people learned to invest in education, people learned to save, and people learned to trade, because there wasn't much agriculture in Rajasthan. We started to trade with the British when they were in India. When the British left India, we took over some of their factories. When the Indian economy liberalized, we started Shrey, which has become one of the leading infrastructure finance companies in India. We also do many charitable and corporate social activities. One of this is an annual conference on humanity, power, and spirituality, which my father organizes every year to promote interfaith harmony and awareness, because we feel that stability of the social structure is also very important as there's economic growth. So currently, the family is involved with 4 major businesses. So we are in the financial services as Shrey. In the infrastructure, we have power distribution, we have telecom towers, we have our own construction company, and we are in the rural. We have also developed one of the largest rural infrastructure technology projects in India, which serves almost 200 million people in the northeast and northwest part of India. Then we are into construction. We are making townships, and our hospital is coming up. And in healthcare, we operate at Vinia in London, and we are putting up this multi-speciality hospital in Bombay. So Shrey offers the full gamut of financial services in India, and the current asset under management is $2.5 billion in India. It is a leading developer of infrastructure space and participates in many government-related public-private partnerships. So Viom is our telecom tower business, which is a merger with the Tata Group. We control the business, and we have 40,000 towers currently in India, telecom towers. India Power Corporation Limited is the power company which we are operating, both in wind power and thermal power. We are setting up one of the largest thermal power plants to supplement this power company in India, and it will give 1,000 megawatts to the eastern part of India in a few years' time. I was mentioning to you about FH. This is, again, a public-private partnership and has created a telecom and technology infrastructure in the rural villages. Then our construction company is doing townships, retail malls, integrated parks, and many plazas. We have also started environmental management with Veolia, Siemens, and ID Technologies to bring pure water into India, to manage the water, because there's a lot of waste being generated, and waste management is extremely poor in India. I recently met some very good environmental management companies from Austria, and I was amazed at the technology that they have developed to recycle waste very efficiently. Advenia is a network of dementia care homes which provides the full spectrum of dementia care in Great Britain. It is highly rated and has won many awards. Advenia Healthcare India is setting up a 350-bed super specialty hospital under the brand name Suwast, which means good health. And in New Bombay is a new part of Bombay where the infrastructure has developed very well. It has one of the best linked motorways. I call it the death highway because it has got 6 lanes, and with very little control over drivers and motor cars, there are so many accidents on the road, and our hospital is coming just at the beginning of this motorway. So we are setting up, this is our hospital under construction, just off the motorway. It is a 500,000 square foot space, and we plan to put the first proton beam cancer treatment facility in this hospital. So this is what the hospital will look when finished. We plan to commission it in January of next year. Okay, now coming to banking. So this is the part of the presentation which my brother was supposed to do, which I had to do. I was supposed to talk on the evolution of banking and banking crisis. And can we avert another banking crisis? There have been many small financial crises, but there have been 5 major financial crises which have changed how people look at financial services, how people look at banking. When banking initially started, no one made a plan. Banking just started to support society and to support the government. And as these crises happened, many changes were put in place to regulate and to prevent another crisis from happening. So the first financial crisis was in 1792, which led to the formation of the stock exchange. What happened was that in the United States, a new bank was formed, and the government decided to sell the shares of this bank to the people, both in the form of stocks and bonds. And there was this British guy, William Duer, who, because there was no functioning stock exchange, he decided to corner the bond market so that he could make a profit out of it. As a result of this, there was a huge panic, and he had to go to jail. The second major financial crisis occurred in 1825. This was the first emerging market crisis which led to the creation of large banks. Between 1792 and 1825, many small banks started to mushroom in the United States. Britain was doing extremely well. The British Empire was extending all over the globe. And Britain was investing in America. Another British guy from Scotland, he decided to create a fictional country called Poyas in Latin America because people were looking for better investments and better returns. And Latin America had become flavor of the year. So the British wanted to invest in Latin America. This guy said, okay, let me invent a fictional country. So he created this country called Poyas, and he issued Poyas bonds, okay, to the British government, to the American banks, etc. As a result, when people realized that these bonds had absolutely no value, and many of the banks and many people invested in these bonds, it led to a huge crisis in the marketplace. The third main crisis that happened was the railroad crisis in 1857. In 1857, the American railroads expanded literally across the whole of the US between 1830 and 1860. Again, people were very bullish about the railroad industry. And Mr. Ludlow from the life insurance company, he decided to put a huge bet on railway stocks. And he used people's money to buy stocks in the railways. What really happened was that many of the banks started to lend money for these shares because they thought that this was a very good investment. And lending against shares, which could finally, because share prices are very volatile. And when the railroads could not deliver on their promises and the share prices fell, there was a huge crisis throughout the globe, which spread from the US right up to Vienna. And many of the Viennese banks and many of the British banks also failed. There were 135 bankruptcies in 3 months, and troops had to be called in the United Kingdom. There were so many crowds around the banks wanting to take their monies out. This led to the creation of cash buffers. Before 1857, there were no cash buffers in a bank. So the banks could lend whatever monies they had. They had no responsibility to the depositors per se by the regulator. In 1907, the British banking system was very well developed by this time, but the United States, in spite of these 3 major financial crises, did not have a central bank. And in 1907, they created a central bank because there were many small and highly leveraged banks. And again, there was a big crisis called the Knickerbocker Crisis, which was created by August Hines and Charles Morse, who tried to create a chain of banks and use the equity of one bank as a collateral to buy the next. So you can see what they were doing. So they had literally created a Ponzi scheme, which led to the failure of the banking system in the US. The 1929 was the Wall Street crash, which many of you must have heard about. This was the Great Depression, which resulted in deposit protection insurance. In 1929, the economy was doing extremely well, the US economy. Ford Motor was producing 10,000 motor cars per day. The economy was doing so well. So the government decided that because of this inflation, we need to increase the interest rates. So the interest rates were increased to 5% suddenly. Because the interest rates were suddenly increased to 5%, it put a brake on the economy so rapidly that businesses started to fail because they could not support the 5% interest rate. They were growing very fast, so they were consuming cash, and they did not have any means to pay the interest. This led to the Wall Street crash, and again, another Briton, Clarence Hattie, was responsible for majority of it. The most recent crisis we know was the 2008 subprime crisis. 2 banks, the Citibank and Royal Bank of Scotland, they had exposure of 6 trillion in the whole world. So this is the GDP of almost 125 countries. So when the subprime crisis hit these banks due to failure of mortgage-related securities in the US, it caused a big crisis, which we all know. And the regulator decided that large banks were too risky and they needed to be broken up. So this brings us to the present time. If you notice, in 1930, the capital ratio of the banks had increased to 16%. It slowly came down to 6%. And now again, the regulator is prompting that the capital ratio of the banks should increase to protect both the consumers and the economy. Coming to Anadi Bank, looking at the whole economic environment, we have decided that the best way for us to function is to focus on good service, to focus on optimizing internal processes, waste management rather than cost management, and on focusing that risk is managed well, because after all, we are custodians of other people's money and we have a responsibility to them. To end this presentation, I would like to tell you a small story. There was a man who went to his bank with a Rolls Royce, and he said that, "Can I borrow against my Rolls Royce?" So the banker said, "Yes." So he said, "Please show me your papers." He showed the papers, and he said, "I just want $200. The banker was very delighted, $200 against a Rolls Royce, which was parked inside the bank. So he said, "I just need the money for 6 months, and I'll come back in 6 months and take my Rolls Royce. So the banker was confused because he didn't know how much to charge him. He said that my bank allows me only to charge 3%, but because it's a short-term loan you're taking, I'll charge you 5%. So I'll charge you $10. So this man was very delighted. He said, here's your $10 interest, and he went away. After 6 months, he came back for his Rolls Royce, and the banker said that, you know, I'm very surprised you own a Rolls Royce, but you still wanted a loan against the Rolls Royce. So he said that, where else can I find a safe, secure place to park my Rolls Royce for 6 months and for so cheap? So the message is that this is what has happened to banking today. Banks are competing with each other fiercely. The rates are coming down further and further. So the margins at which lending is happening today is so low that many banks are bound to fail. Because unless a business is profitable, a business can create its own surplus so it can show its balance sheet. You cannot just keep taking money from outside sources to strengthen your balance sheet. So the message is that banks have to be competitive. They have to lend at the right rates, which is economically viable for them, and not just do cheap lending.
I would ask you a certain question.
Sure, please.
In our communication, as I mentioned before, I noticed that you always responded quickly, and I was impressed and overwhelmed because, as I said, there are lots of multiple tasks and responsibilities which you have. In 2010, Noria Ghoshal came out with a publication from Harvard Business School where he said Indian way of management, where he praised the Indian way of management, where he said the CEOs especially take care of the people, are experts in multiple tasks. Would you agree with that?
I think multitasking goes with many Indian people, because if you look at our skill base, although people are highly educated, people are very literate, there is an acute shortage of skills, practical skills, and that is what I have noted when I have been trying to set up this in my hospital in India. As a result of which, the CEO has to do many tasks and he has to learn, otherwise he cannot be a CEO. So he's not only the CEO developing strategy, he's also the chief operating officer, he's also the CFO, and he also is sometimes a manager. So he has to develop multiple skills if he wants to create a successful organization. So for example, I've had to, in the last 4 years, I've had to design the hospital, I have had to create all the patient flows in the hospital, because what I realized was because there are not so many modern hospitals which have been developed in India. It has in the last few years, but still not to the extent that is needed in the population. And as a result of which, many of the architectural practices do not have the relevant experience of designing hospitals. So they do not even understand how a hospital should be designed with proper operational flow. So you have to learn how to multitask. You have to learn, otherwise you can't survive in India.
I appreciate this answer, this honest answer, and I must say that it reflects also this, not only the multitask, also the capacity of the CEO to handle not only the strategic decision making, with most of the CEOs are busy with, but also at the down floor. Naturally, I'm sure the curiosity in everybody's eyes is, why did you switch from medicine into this financial business?
When I first came to England in '89 to train as a surgeon, I did my surgical training, and after finishing all my surgical training and becoming a senior registrar, I got very bored of doing general surgery, and I wanted to go back to India to set up healthcare systems. At that time in '95, I decided to do an MBA. I thought that would help me in setting up a good quality healthcare system in India. After the MBA, McKinsey came and recruited me from the campus, and everyone told me it would be a big mistake not to take on this offer, and it would help me, help me understand things much better from the practical side. So I worked with McKinsey for 2.5 years, but I missed medicine, I missed operating, and I wanted to go back to training in liver transplantation and finishing a PhD. So when I went back to liver transplant training in the UK, so many doors were closed for me. And finally, I had to take an honorary fellowship at one of the top universities there for a year to prove that, yes, I was serious about liver transplantation. And at the same time, to support the family, I started a healthcare business, because they were not giving me any salary. After a year, they realized that, yes, I was very serious, and I came up with this innovative concept for reducing liver injury. And I developed the whole hypothesis and the research protocol for that. And we developed the care home business as well, which was supporting me financially. So both things happened at the same time. So what I realized was that you may plan many things, but sometimes fate and God has other plans for you, and you just have to move along with life rather than think too much. And that's what I did. I just went with the flow and did my best in whatever I could. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.